Hi, everyone. So, this morning I want to talk about the third wave medicine. I've spoken about the first and the second. This is the third wave, and it's probably the most difficult one to talk about because it hasn't yet really formalized itself. It hasn't really showed up completely. But there's lots of evidence for it, and I want to talk about that. So, remember, the first wave was what I called medicine of experience, indigenous medicine, which worked for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And that was the medicine of experience of people traveling around, somehow getting in touch with the world around them and finding a way to heal. Then that was shifted very quickly into what's called modern medicine today, which is a medicine of experiment. And there was a good reason for that. The first wave was messy. It shifted all the time. There were different techniques, different ideas around the nature of reality, and what was going on was very individual and subjective. And the new science decided that no, we can't really function in that space. We need to find out what's really going on, and the way to do that is to remove all the subjective components which can't be measured, and so it's just points of views, and only stick to what can be measured. That's the objective, clear insights around the second wave. Only stick to what can be measured. And so what could be measured only when it came to human beings was the body and chemistry and physiology. So that's the area where the second wave was stuck in. Very, very reductionistic, reducing everything to a very small box that can be measured, and the whole of the subjective world was excluded because you can't measure it and it's messy. Despite the fact that the scientists were all subjective beings and having their insights and their feelings and their intuitive stuff coming up, and despite all that, despite the reality of that, all that was excluded as being not interesting enough, that we can stick just to what can be measured. And that's slowly developed what I call the machine model, or flat earth model. Machine model because the human being then became a machine that you could open up and dissect and remove things and replace. So what's happened since then? And the interesting thing is that the third wave is actually being driven by quantum science. Now, isn't that so interesting that science is driving the third wave, which is very, very different. And we need to have a look at it because quantum scientists have developed the whole idea of reality that's very different to the old school of Newtonian medicine. So what happened? Well, what happened was that the first group of scientists were looking at the human being as a machine, and they were breaking this machine apart and isolating various parts in the liver and the kidneys and the blood and the nervous system and the brain, and trying to find the basic building blocks. In the same way as you would take a house apart looking for the basic building blocks, and you'd find bricks. And that's how the house was built, with bricks. That's the basic building block. So they were trying to look for the basic building block of the human being. And so they started with the body because that's where they were, and started to take the body apart. And then eventually they came to cells. And they thought, okay, cells are the basic building block. It fitted in with the idea of bricks. But the thing is that they were able to then break the cells apart. And that surprised them a bit because they broke the cells apart, and then they came to molecules. They broke molecules apart, and they came eventually to atoms and particles. And then, to their big surprise, these particles would not matter. They were just bits of energy information flying around, disappearing and appearing. And Max Planck, who was one of the fathers of quantum science, he made a statement, I think it was in his Nobel Prize speech, I'm not sure, but he said that I've been examining matter all my working life. And I can tell you one thing, there's no such thing as matter. There's only energy information. Now, that was a shocking statement at the time for a scientist to say there's no such thing as matter. Of course, what he meant was that behind what looked like matter was energy information. And when energy information slowed down enough, it became solid. In the same way as steam, if it slows down, it becomes water, slows down more, it becomes ice. So it's a question of speed, of molecules. But matter is not what we think it is. It's actually the face, the representation of energy information. So behind this body that you have is actually not something as solid as you think it is, because the basic building blocks are not solid at all. They're energy information. But then quantum science went even deeper, because they saw these particles disappearing. And where were they disappearing? They thought it was into this so-called vacuum at one time. It's called the vacuum space. Particles were disappearing there, and then suddenly appearing out of this vacuum. And that took them a long time to sort out. Now, of course, we know that the so-called vacuum is not empty. The particles were disappearing into it anyway, coming out of it, that this vacuum space is actually what's called full of potential. And that's such a beautiful statement for me. So it's empty of matter, but full of potential. And out of that potential comes everything that you see as matter. So how does this fit in with what I'm calling the third wave of medicine? Well, quantum science went further. And that's even more disturbing for other scientists. They said they discovered that the mere act of observation changes what you observe. So the act of observation, the mere act of observation, changes what outcomes are. In other words, the observer and what's observed are interactive in some kind of strange way that scientists don't understand, but that's what's happening. So that blew all of science apart, because all scientists were doing experiments thinking that they were totally separate from the experiment. Now, quantum science says doesn't work like that. Actually, the very act of doing science, you are in a way contributing to the outcome. And that was, that threw science a little bit haywire, and why a lot of scientists don't even like to go there, because what's that mean? It means that doing my research, I'm actually affecting outcome. I can't be unbiased. Isn't that so strange? I can't be unbiased. Whether I like it or not, I'm biased, because somewhere deep inside me, I have an idea of outcomes, and so I'm interfering with the results. So that brings me to the third wave. There are lots of other things around quantum science, like the whole idea of complexity, and we can't really ever know everything. So quantum scientists have become really humble, because they realize that the world is more strange, much more strange than they thought it was. So the third wave of medicine needs to take that into account. It needs to take into account that the act of observation changes what you observe. So the interaction between the doctor and the patient is major. It's not just a little, there's two bodies sitting across from each other. It's not two bodies. It's two energy informational systems which are connected to something very deep. And these interactive systems are interconnecting and communicating and talking, and it makes a big difference how we do that. So that brings me to the placebo response, that I will want to talk about a lot more than I will now. But remember, the placebo response is enigmatic. It's strange. Doctors like to think of it as woo-woo or mind over matter. Well, call it mind over matter if you want to. What about calling it consciousness, awareness, because that affects outcome? So the placebo is not just a sugar pill. It's the meaning. It's called meaning medicine. It's the meaning people give to that pill that's given to them, or the meaning people give to the technique that's been there, or the meaning people give to the very fact that they've made an appointment and come and sat in a doctor's office. The meaning that they give changes everything. That is putting us in the line of the third wave of medicine. And I'm going to stop over there, because I don't want to tire people with these ideas. But please keep in mind that there's a lot more going on in our interaction with our children, with our partner. We are not bodies. We are energy informational systems, open-ended, creative, conscious, aware. And all that changes everything that's happening in our reality. Have a good day.